Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got two of my favorite politicians back on tonight, the Honorable Tony Clement and the Honorable Sergio Marchi, who I've had the pleasure of having on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and they've agreed to join me again tonight to talk about the French language debate that took place last night in Montreal. What happened? Did anyone score any knockout punches? What was the big issues that came out of it? And to give some advice as to what should happen tonight in the English language debate that's coming up in about 2 hours. And then also to just talk about the campaign generally and where things are going and what they're doing and what the leaders are doing. So Tony Clement, Honorable Tony Clement, and Sergio Marchi, the Honorable Sergio Marchi, both former cabinet ministers. Tony for both the provincial government as well as the federal government, and Sergio Marchi for the federal Liberal government. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Appreciate you joining.
Sure.
Thank you.
So maybe Tony, I can start with you. The Conservatives have lost a certain amount of support in the polls, and people thought that Pierre Poilievre had to really win it tonight and last night. Do you think he did it?
Well, I think he did what he had to do, which was talk about the issues in a broader perspective. If it's just about tariffs, that's one critical aspect of the country's future. But his selling point is saying, look, it's not just about what's happened in the last 2 months; it's what's happened in the last 10 years, and talking about the Liberal record, which Mark Carney has been a part of. So I think he was able to do that. What I liked a couple of things that Pierre Poilievre did. First of all, I thought he kept his cool, which I think was important for those who think that hear the Liberal propaganda that he's a raving lunatic. So that was important. And secondly, several times during the debate, he would look directly at the camera and speak to the audience. And I think that's a time-honored technique in these debates. But I think he pulled it off, and he talked about how people are hurting and how they need to have affordable housing and they need to have a cost of living that they can afford. All of these things that actually people are talking about at the door. So I think he accomplished those things for sure.
Sergio Marchi, what do you think? Carney, I think people thought would be overpowered with a 3 against 1. He's, a first timer in a leaders debate, doesn't have the political experience that the others have. Did he survive? Did he lose? Did he win? What do you think?
Well, I think he did more than just survive. I think on the whole, it was a very decent civil debate. I don't think there was a lot of shouting. There were attempts to intervene while some were speaking. But I think it was a decent debate. There were no great clashes. There was no knockout punch. And when you're the front runner, as Carney is, that's a good night. I thought he maintained his composure. I agree also with Tony that his leader was composed, so he took some advice before this debate. But I think our guy looked good. I think his body language was good because that's the first thing people notice before they speak. I think it was also a badge of honor that the three others probably attacked Carney more than anyone else, and that's a badge of honor because that's a recognition that he's the man to beat. He's the one in the lead. So, customarily, you try to bring that guy down. But I also think that the other two, the Bloc and the NDP, also challenge Pierre Poilievre. Again, he's not the guy leading, but I found it interesting that he took a lot of punches as well, and not just Carney. So I think it was a very neutral debate, a very civil debate, which is the way I think debates should happen now and in the future.
Sergio, do you think that his French, Mark Carney's French, was adequate enough?
I think it was adequate. Look, he admitted that he gave himself a score of 6 out of 10. I think that was an honest, practical assessment. I think Quebecers would agree with that. I don't think Quebecers will charge him for that. I think Quebecers, as long as you are trying and you are endeavoring to communicate in the French language, that will be appreciated. And I think the testimony to that is that Carney in the province of Quebec has a 20-plus lead over Poilievre in terms of who would make the best prime minister. So it's not just about language. It's about economic experience, economic competence, and the ability to lead. I remember that Stephen Harper, when he started out in politics, was far from a 6. But then he developed a great proficiency for the language, which came with experience, with time, with maturity. So I think Carney is honest about his French at the level 6. I think in a couple of years he'll do as well as Stephen Harper did. So I don't think that was an issue last night. He communicated his thoughts. I thought people, were better than him on French. Obviously, the leader was in his element, obviously. I think Pierre speaks a very good French. But again, I don't think that's going to be held against Carney because I think he's honest. And as long as you're honest and you're endeavoring, you get the benefit of the doubt.
Tony, you mentioned that Pierre Poilievre tried to widen the debate to not just be on Trump and tariffs, and he also tried very hard to label Mark Carney as part of the Trudeau four-term or what would be a four-term legacy. Did he succeed in that regard? He mentioned it on several occasions, and then Carney said, "Well, no, I was the governor of the Bank of England," and then he sort of said, "Well, you weren't a very good governor of the Bank of England either," and so it was like you couldn't have it both ways. You can't say you were a liberal advisor and you were also at the Bank of England. So did it stick? Do you think that the trying to connect him with the Trudeau legacy stuck?
Well, I think time will tell on that. It certainly is part of the narrative. All the Liberals want us to forget they've already had 3 terms, and for a lot of people, things haven't gone very well for them economically or cost of living and those kinds of things. So I think it is important that the Conservatives continue to drill home about that, and Carney shouldn't have the dispensation to say, I'm just a newcomer, so anything that went bad that happened over the last years, that's not my fault, and then rely on his experience. I don't buy that either. So there's this tussle going on. Whether it'll stick or not, which is your question, look, here's my experience with these leaders' debates. You and I and Sergio, we can talk about them, and it's important that we do, but the people who are watching are going to make up their mind over the next 48 to 72 hours. It's not immediate. So we've gone 24 hours so far. We got another 48 hours to go, and then you've got the English debate tonight too. So all of these things are happening, and there will be a crystallized kind of view, which may be exactly what pundits like us are saying, or it might be completely opposite from what we're saying. So that's why I get to say time will tell.
Well, it's interesting because people say they don't actually watch the debates anymore. They watch the clips from the debates. And I think with the Habs game on, probably even more people are going to be watching the clips rather than the actual debate. But Sergio, I wonder if I could ask you for the reality.
There are Canadian priorities after all.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I confess I switched as soon as I could.
So, Sergio, what's the reality though? Because I'm just a viewer of what your guys' business is. You guys have lived the business. When I think about John Turner versus Pierre Trudeau, or Paul Martin versus Jean Chrétien, or even from a conservative standpoint, Pierre Poilievre versus Aaron O'Toole versus Stephen Harper. Leaders are very different and can take their parties and their governments in very different directions, can they? So is it a fourth Liberal term or is it a first Carney term?
I think, first of all, on the debate, you've got two forces that are competing. One is the Trump threats, both economically and politically, that I think, fair to say, has captivated the attention and the frustration and anger of Canadians. And then obviously Pierre Poilievre pushing the change. And after 10 years, that's a natural response, because when you hit the clock at 10 years, people do itch for a change. We've seen that time and over again. Is it the fourth mandate or the first mandate? I think they're going to judge Carney based on his experience, on his proposals. I don't think he's ever asked, to borrow a word from Tony, a special dispensation. He's not making excuses. He came in and actually differed with Trudeau by cutting a number of policies right off the bat. I think the debate, sometimes people go into a debate having to do a knockout. And we saw that in 1984 when I think Mulroney certainly knocked out John Turner with the answer and question over his appointments where he arguably said he didn't have an option. That was a watershed moment. I remember I was actually too nervous to watch the debate. I was campaigning and canvassing like Tony was today. And every door I would go to, they'd say, boy, your boss is getting whipped. And so there was no question that that debate really performed for Brian. 4 years later, less of a punch, but notwithstanding, I thought that Turner caught Mulroney flat-footed on the FTA. And actually, after that debate, the Liberals actually went in the lead until Mulroney then rallied the troops and bought a lot of advertising and blew up the bridge of trust that Turner had built temporarily. I think tonight's debate or yesterday's debate, and we'll have to see what the English debate is about, is more not seeking a knockout punch, but trying to make an argument, trying to educate Canadians not on the issues only, but on what each party leader's value add on those issues are. I think that's a healthier democratic event for Canadians. I know sometimes people love to see some blood and gore. But that wasn't the case last night. We'll have to see what happens in the English debate.
Tony, was there a knockout punch?
No, there wasn't. But there were moments, and I'm going to nitpick here, guys. And I know I'm nitpicking because you asked the question earlier about Carney and his French, and I'd like to answer that. I thought his French, as Sergio said, was adequate. I felt that he was getting less comfortable in the debate as the debate went on. That's just my impression. We'll see how Francophone Canadians see it. But I just felt that the back and forth after a while kind of tired Carney out a little bit on it. And I felt that Pierre Poilievre was getting more animated as the debate went on. So that's just my impression. And for what it's worth, and I'll stick a pin in that, and we'll see what happens tonight with the English debate. So there's that. Knockout punches, very rare now. Mostly candidates are well prepared for these debates. But I think it was important for for at least two of the candidates, Carney and Pierre Poilievre, particularly in the province of Quebec, to introduce themselves to that audience in Quebec. And so this was a bit of a watershed. How it'll come out, I don't know. But I think for that reason, it was more important than your average debate, where you might have, in normal circumstances, the leader of the Liberal Party and the leader of the Conservative Party have duked it out for months on end in the House of Commons. We've had none of that. For the obvious reasons that the House of Commons has been shuttered, and Carney is a new leader for the Liberals. So this is the replacement for that, and therefore has added significance, is what I'm trying to say.
Let me touch on what Tony raised, because I agree with him, and I don't think it was Carney's faltering French, but I think it was more a byproduct that when Pierre or Singh or Blanchet would jump in and, let's say, interrupt Carney's train of thought, then I think there were moments where it took him time to respond, because he's not gifted in the French language, not yet. And secondly, he's not the politician yet that the others were. And so when there were interruptions, I thought that Carney was too much of a gentleman not to push back, and kind of that came out in his language. I don't think it was a tiring effect. I don't think it was a degrading. I think it was the moment when there was a clash that his French train of thought was interrupted, and that's being human, I guess, when you say you're 6 out of 10.
I think you guys are being far too harsh, and maybe it's because you're both probably far more bilingual than I am and far more experienced in parliamentary debates. But you know what? I've taken French my whole life. I use French every once in a while in business. If one person is speaking to me in French, I'm okay. If three people are interrupting me and interrupting each other and speaking in French, whether it's at a boardroom table or in a party, I get lost. I can't.
You should see it in the House of Commons, Brian, when people are throwing epithets at you in French and English as you're trying to answer a question in question period. So yeah, that's the job.
We're
And
going
the
to take a
first
break for
rule
some
is,
messages and get back in 2 minutes. And I'm going to switch to some of the policy issues that were discussed during the debate. Stay with us, everyone. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with the Honorable Tony Clement and the Honorable Sergio Marchi in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're talking about last night's French debate. We're talking about the election campaign. We're talking about advice for tonight's debate and what we think is going to happen in this election campaign with a very involved conservative politician, the Honorable Tony Clement. He's been a cabinet minister provincially. He's been a cabinet minister in numerous different portfolios federally. He ran for leader at one point in time, so he's probably done some of that debate prep. Actually, I think you ran for leader both provincially and federally, didn't you? Or was it just federally?
Correct. No, provincially and federally.
So
Yeah.
lots of debate prep, probably, as well as actual debates. And the Honorable Sergio Marchi, who was a cabinet minister in the Liberal government previously, and a very long-term politician and political activist as well. I wonder if I could ask you, the two of you, about a couple of the issues on Trump, which came out right from the first minute of the debate last night. I thought the answers were pretty consistent and good. And it was, hanging tough. And there wasn't a lot of separation on what the attitude would be, what the strategy would be with Trump. And that probably is advantage to Poilievre, because I think people were thinking that Carney had this huge advantage with a different kind of a strategy, but Poilievre was sort of matching that. Tony, how did you perceive that back and forth on how you would deal with Trump?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, obviously, Jagmeet Singh, we haven't talked about much about him, but his debate prep was mention healthcare 12 times a minute. So we heard a lot about protecting healthcare from Jagmeet Singh. Just a point.
Until you get cut off by the moderator.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I think that there is a consensus of hanging tough against the bully in the room, Donald Trump. The one extra point that Pierre had to make and did make was, look, we're to the extent that we're in a weakened position, it's because of 10 years of liberalism that got us to this point. And if we had made different choices with respect to resource development and military and so on, we'd be in a stronger position. So he had to make that point, and he did make that point. But other than that, I think for the audience viewing it, I think you're accurate, Brian, that there wasn't a lot of difference there. And as you said, for Pierre Poilievre, that's a win. You've discussed the issue. You're not trying to hide from the issue. You have a plan of attack on the issue. Now let's talk about other things that Pierre Poilievre is talking about: cost of living and resource development and crime and all these other things that are populating the campaign. So I think that's fair, and it is fair for the organizers to start with the Trump tariffs. I will tell you, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more, because I'm at the door knocking on doors in different ridings every day. The amount of Trump stuff that I get at the door has declined quite significantly. And the amount of time we talk about cost of living issues and trying to pay the rent and trying to pay for groceries and crime, especially in the GTA, in Mississauga ridings and elsewhere, is significantly a higher part of the conversation. So I think what Pierre Poilievre had to do and did do was to track those issues.
Sergio, the big advantage that Carney has is his experience. At least that's what people say. I was at church on the weekend, and I was chatting in the coffee hour with some people, and two of them said, "Well, we just want the economics guy." So they didn't even know his name. They just said, "We want the economics guy," and I thought that was kind of interesting. But he didn't seem to talk about that a lot. He didn't. It's almost as if he's embarrassed about how good his resume is. Do you think that Carney is doing the right things in regards to, his bona fides, in regards to being governor of the Bank of England, the Conservatives have made a hay out of Liz Truss complaining about Carney's time, but Liz Truss is no economic giant, that's for sure. So, is he doing enough to remind people about his bona fides in his experience?
I think he is, Brian. I think that's his battle cry across the country. Obviously, he discusses all the other issues. He's announced his policy domains on those issues. On the weekend, the platform, fully costed, will come out. And obviously, that platform won't just address the threats from the bully to the south. It's going to have a wide array of issues. The question is, for last night's debate, it's difficult to differentiate based on 30, 40 seconds of answering time. And what we saw last night on the Trump issue, I think, was reassuring because there was a sense of consensus. There was a sense of unity among the different leaders that this guy, Trump, is unhinged, that he's creating economic and political uncertainty, that people are losing their jobs, people are being laid off, companies will have to be assisted in order to sustain themselves. So I don't think he low bridged the issue. There's only so much in 30, 40, 50 seconds, but I think that's his ace of spades. When people are asked about their preferences for the different leaders, his experience and economic know-how, I think, runs very high. And so if Trump is the dominating issue, then obviously economic experience is going to be looked at in our leaders. And when they do that, I think Carney is going to look very good. I don't think he's the type of politician that promotes himself at every instance. He's rather low-keyed, he's rather composed, he's rather gentlemanly. But in the time of a crisis, I think that very etiquette works and sells.
Tony, what do you think the other issues are that came out? You mentioned affordability. I was surprised, frankly, that that healthcare did come out a lot, thanks to Jagmeet Singh's constant repetition of that, as you mentioned, but also climate change. I was surprised that the climate change question was actually, now that you got rid of the carbon tax, or at least the consumer portion of the, what are you going to do for climate change? And I thought that ended up being a big question that at least the moderator and the people interviewed on screen were asking for answers to.
Right, and the moderator really tried to press home on that because, quite frankly, the answers, aside from Pierre Poilievre, who is pro oil and gas and makes no bones about it, so he was clear on it. The others were less clear on that. Jagmeet was the worst on it, in my opinion, and Blanchet was not too far behind, and Carney said he's pro oil and gas, so I guess he said that, but actions will speak louder than words, I suppose. So yeah, no, it was a good discussion to have, and I think that what Pierre Poilievre tried to do when he was pressed on the issue, say, what happens if there is no consensus to build that pipeline, that indigenous groups and others will oppose the pipeline. What do you do then? So that was Pierre Poilievre's chance to say, well, look, here's what indigenous people are saying. Here's what Quebecers are saying. Perhaps for the first time, when you poll Quebecers, they are massively in favor of pipelines. So he got to get that point out, which was an important point for him to make in the province of Quebec, because he's kind of like the outlier on that issue. He's got the other three parties or four parties on one side of the issue. He's on the other side of the issue. So I thought that was actually a very good point for Pierre on that issue.
But I think at the same time, pipelines in Quebec is a double-edged sword, right? The other leaders, I thought, were playing to the Quebec audience perhaps more than Poilievre, and you can have your opinion about whether that's good or bad. I personally believe that we have to get back to building big things again, and energy infrastructure is one of them. We can't continue to sell 95% of our oil to the Americans. We need to bring oil both to the West Coast and the East Coast to Europe, the West Coast to Asia. And I think we're going to see a change even in Quebecers when it comes to the whole issue of pipeline. I also thought, though, when we're talking about non-Trump issues, I also thought that the immigration issue and the housing issue also animated all the leaders, and they had a pretty crisp debate on that. So it was a multifaceted debate from that standpoint, which I think is good because it gives Canadians more to chew on in terms of making their final decision in the next 2 weeks.
Did the
just
housing, did the housing
one
ex-
quick point. One quick
Go
point
ahead,
about
sorry.
the pipeline, and then we can move on. But on Sergio's point, I actually think that that Carney is the most have your cake and eat it too kind of politician on the pipeline, saying he respects provincial and indigenous dominion, but he's in favor of pipelines. Well, at some point you have to show leadership, or it'll never get done, and that's what's happened in this country for 10 years. So I think that was an important departure point for Poilievre versus the other candidates.
But I also think, Tony, that it's not having your cake and eat it too, but you're also being honest. You're in favor of pipelines, but you're also recognizing that under democracy, in terms of public opinion, there is a process and a process to respect. In other words, Indigenous people should have their comments. Environmentalists should have their comment. But I think the context is that our closest friend, ally, partner has abandoned us. And therefore, yes, people can have their say, but I think the issue of pipelines, the importance has just shot up dramatically. And you just can't be allowed to offer opinions as a way of ragging the puck. In other words, state your case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Make your case, and then let's move on. I think that's what he was saying.
Okay.
So I think most experts would say that there's no private sector business case for a Canadian pipeline. And so therefore, when Carney says the only reason why you would build a Canadian pipeline across North Superior would be for national security reasons. Otherwise, for cost reasons, you just ship it through the U.S. Poilievre said that the government wouldn't subsidize a pipeline. So do you think that was addressed adequately? If we're going to build a pipeline north of Superior to not have our oil go through Michigan and come into Canada through Sarnia, it's going to take a very substantial investment of public dollars to.
Well, we've left about $500 billion on the table in this country for the reasons that Sergio has already mentioned. We've got a bunch of legislation that dissuades people from building this massive infrastructure, whether it's LNG terminals or pipelines or critical minerals, and consequently, we've lost that investment. It could have been there, but it's not there. And so the point that Sergio's making, that Pierre Poilievre is making, that Tony Clement is making, we've got to actually get rid of those ridiculous pieces of legislation that over-regulate and make it increasingly difficult to get these projects done. And I think that's the point that we're trying to make.
Well, the line that Poilievre was that if you build the LNG and ship it to India, you've got 3 times the benefit.
Right.
in
that's what Pierre said. That's what Pierre said.
I thought that was a great comment that he had.
Yeah.
The other question is, you can't look at it just, is this infrastructure cost effective? In other words, if that was the be and end all, would we have built, our forefathers, would they have built the Trans-Canada Highway? Would they have built the National Railway? Would they have built a national broadcaster? In other words, some things are worth investing because of who we are and what we do. And so on the pipeline, I think when Carney says the old relationship with the United States is over, we must reimagine a new economy, I take that to mean reimagine what we do with pipelines, reimagine what we do with internal trade, reimagine in light of quite the crisis where Canadians are obviously preoccupied. It's a top of mind issue so far. We'll see how the last 14 days go. But I think when you're looking at reimagining and rebuilding, you have to put all things on the table. And I think everybody has to come at it from a sense of relevancy and urgency. And if Canadians have this as a top of mind issue, then I think public opinion will be very, very important in reimagining things. And people will have to, give the majority of Canadians the respect that it deserves.
I agree with you. I guess I just wish that they had said it's going to have to take some public dollars. To say that you're going to be able to justify that pipeline north of Superior to duplicate what currently goes through Michigan, it's going to take a substantial amount of Canadian financial commitment. We got to take a break for some messages, and we're going to be back in 2 minutes. And I'm going to ask them about the Bloc Québécois leader, as well as what they've got to do tonight, if anything different, to win the election. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've got the Honorable Sergio Marchi and the Honorable Tony Clement, a Liberal and a Conservative, on tonight for the second time. My privilege to have them back on for a second round of our discussion of what's going on in the election. We're chatting about what happened in the French language debate last night, and I want to talk in a minute about their suggestions for tonight in the English language debate to see if anything's different. But before we do that, I want to take a step back for a second and talk about the Bloc Québécois leader. I thought that actually he was put in a bad place on several occasions. There's the national unity section where they were actually showing balconies of apartment buildings in Montreal with a whole bunch of Canadian flags on it. He was, talking about, we already talked about pipelines. He made this weird comment about, does Quebec have to be a province of Mexico if it's going to negotiate? How do you think? I think he actually harmed himself last night. Do either of you have a perception of how he did?
I didn't have that perception, which is fine. We'll find out, as I say, over the next 48 hours. I felt that Blanchet has been a little bit absent because of the nature of this campaign. So to have him on an even footing with Carney, with Poilievre, with Singh is only to the benefit of Blanchet. So no, I thought he was obviously the most comfortable in the language, that goes without saying, and most emotional, which Quebecers tend to like in their leaders. And so no, I thought he came across pretty well. That was just my perception.
Yeah, I kind of concur with Tony. I think every leader had a moment or two. It's the nature of the game in 2 hours. But I think he was passionate, as Tony mentioned. I think he was obviously extremely articulate. It allowed him to bob and weave with issues closest to the hearts of Quebecers. So last night's debate was for him an attempt to stop the bleeding of his voters to the Liberals. We'll have to see what the post-debate analysis looks like, how many people watched the debate versus how many people were waiting for the Habs to clinch the playoffs. I think the English debate will again put Blanchet in a bit of a corner where he is not as relevant as with the other leaders, given that he's only fielding candidates in Quebec, although there's Montreal English-speaking communities, of course. But I would also anticipate that you're going to have the Liberal leader much more animated and much more comfortable in his own language. So if I think he did well last night, I'm looking for an even better production in tonight's debate. So although Sergio, you never know, because there's always the possibility of slipping on an English banana peel, just like French. So you just never know.
Sergio, so if you sat down with Mark Carney this morning and assessed what happened last night and gave him some advice for tonight, what would you tell him? Would you tell him he had to do anything different?
Yeah, I think he obviously wasn't in the language of his preference. So you'll see I think a marked change. But in terms of last night's debate, I would argue that he needs to be a little more animated and a little more passionate. At times, he was almost too composed, if you know what I mean. I think Quebecers, but Canadians in general, like a fighter, like a little bit of fire in the belly. And perhaps that's not his persona, and maybe it's his persona that is appealing to Canadians in a moment of crisis. But I would say a little more animated. And number two, when other leaders jump on you, don't suddenly put the brakes and don't look like a deer caught in headlights. Keep talking, keep communicating your message. A few times he kind of put out his hand and say, pardon me, but I have the floor. But at other times he gave way to Poilievre and to Blanchet. So I would argue if you're speaking, just keep going. Don't let others interrupt your narrative and have perhaps Canadians see a garbled message, and that I think comes with political experience. Again, this is his first political rodeo, so you've got the learning curve.
He said,
Let's not
if I
forget.
may,
Sorry.
dozens of times, which is sort of a nice way of saying, please stop interrupting me, but it doesn't have the same impact. Should he
Yeah.
stop saying, if I may?
Well, I don't know what advice I give to Mark Carney. I think I agree with Sergio a little bit more. Rocket sauce would be a little bit helpful to get his message out. Yeah, he was a little bit passive. Let's just put it that way. And I understand why. It's not his language, and I get that. But too much passivity kind of undermines your main selling point. So
Tony,
I agree with Sergio on that.
Tony, what if you sat down with Pierre Poilievre? He's
he's got the
20-point lead. He's now behind in the polls. What's he got to do tonight?
Yeah, I don't know about blowing the 20-point lead. I don't accept that narrative. But anyway, regardless of that, look, I think he's got the toughest job because if he is too animated, it might look like aggression, and if he's too passive, he looks too robotic. So what am I going to say? Go in between? I don't know. It's maybe he's got to pick his moments to intervene or something. But I kind of thought, much to my, and I wouldn't have given this advice before the French debate. I got to be honest with you. I would have said be more animated. But I think that he was pretty good at being prime ministerial, making his points, but not looking like an insane person, which would be the kiss of death for him. So yeah, maybe that's what you rinse and repeat in English and get your points out. And he's very good at what the message has to be and communicating that message. And then you hope for the best. I guess that's nobody knows the secret sauce, much as they claim to. These things just have their own way of concluding. So we'll all know together.
Sergio, what do you think? Should Poilievre be more animated?
No, if I was giving Poilievre advice, I'd give it him based on what some of his weak spots are, perception-wise, rightly or wrongly. I don't think he's a very likable guy. His biography says he's an angry teenager in the man of a body.
That's not his biography. That's some ink-stained wretch who wrote that. Let's be clear.
But let's be clear that it's probably closer to the truth.
Oh, come on. No, it's not even close to the truth.
Absolutely. Anyway. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had him kind of be almost courteous last night. I don't think he was the kind of guy that he is in question period.
He's an opposition leader. The opposition leader you're supposed to oppose. Come on now.
I'm just saying my point that the advice that I would give to Poilievre is not to be overly active. In other words, to counteract what the public perception on him is. And he's not a likable guy. Whether you're Sergio Marchi saying it, or whether you're Doug Ford saying it, or whether the campaign manager of Doug Ford is saying it, I think there's an amount of truth to that. Now, the public may be wrong, but that's the perception. So I would play to his weaknesses, which means sober up a little bit. Don't get as animated. Don't intervene as often. And look, as Tony said, try to look the prime ministerial part. That's working for Carney. It can also work for him.
Can I just remind everybody that this is Pierre's first rodeo too. It's not as if he's run for prime minister ever before. Okay, so this is all new for him as well. I know, everybody has the impression that he's the guy that's been around. Yes, he's been around the House of Commons, but he hasn't been leader of the Conservative Party for an election. So yeah, he's got to set an impression that hasn't been set yet because he hasn't run for this position before.
No, but he's built a reputation about who he is as a politician for a long time. You're right. This is his first leadership, just like Carney. The other gentlemen are obviously more experienced, but the reputation precedes you, rightly or wrongly.
Sergio, I got to
Yeah,
ask you about
I
that.
think a lot of people were not clued in to that, all of that in indoor baseball stuff. So I'm not convinced of that, but we'll see.
Let me ask you about this though, Sergio, because the persona that he has that you've sort of described works in his rallies, and he's attracting thousands of people to these rallies that like his speeches, that like his style, that like his criticism of the lost liberal decade, according to him, etc. So in the English language debate, doesn't he have to a certain extent, make sure that his base still hears him, or no? Does he only play to the undecided?
Well, I think the two are vastly different things, right? So he's been getting good crowds. I think Carney's bringing in them in as well. But at a Carney rally or at a Polyev rally, you're throwing meat to the base, right? You don't get undecideds going to the rally. You largely have your partisan crowd going to the rally to support your leader, to hear your leader, to give good visual optics. In a debate that's transmitted nationally, you got to break out of your partisan. In other words, if you continue to throw red meat to your partisans on a debate, you're not going to grow. So the object of the debate is to grow your votes, to grow your base and go beyond your own. There's nothing easier when you get a great crowd for a leader to whip up that crowd in a rally. It's much more difficult to go in a debate where you're trying to reach people who traditionally might not be supporting you or who are on the fence. The two are very, very different. We'll have to wait and see whether that strategy paid off by using resources and energy to bring in partisans rather than growing the base.
Well, I would say two things about the English debate, which is coming up very shortly. Number one, for Pierre Poilievre, he's got to do two things simultaneously. And this is sort of what Sergio was saying too. But number one, he does have to reach the 30% that are still undecided or susceptible to changing their vote. That's a 30% block in this country right now. Secondly, he still has to motivate his voters. Like right now, conservative voters are the most motivated. I think it's 86% are very motivated to vote versus 76%, which is high for the Liberals' very motivated vote. So that's an advantage the Conservative Party has. So he's got to keep people motivated at the same time as reaching those 30% that could be persuaded. It's a difficult position to do, and we'll all find out together whether he's done it or not.
I got to ask the two of you about this last back and forth about the notwithstanding clause and repeat offenders. I thought that Mark Carney was trying to make a really important comment in regards to sort of breaching the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but then it didn't work. I didn't think because Poilievre had the comeback that you're trying to protect repeat offenders. How did Sergio, was Carney right to try to land that? It was almost sort of inside politics. Unless people had read the papers about the notwithstanding clause and the argument, they may not have understood the point. It seemed like it was sort of too intellectual to hit.
Yeah, I guess Carney's premise was to Poilievre, if you start here, where do you end in terms of the notwithstanding clause, and how many times do you then bring it out? And it's a tough position to take, whether you're Carney or you're Singh or you're Blanchet, because when you're talking about serious crime offenders, people who've murdered entire families, the passion of Canadians is with you, right? No one likes to see someone coming out of prison too early for the crime that they had. So it's a very difficult one between being honest and responsible with the Constitution and perhaps being more responsible as a politician and playing to the crowd. I don't think Carney necessarily played to the crowd, so there may be also respect for that kind of approach. But clearly, the knee-jerk reaction is on Poilievre's side, right? When they look at these horrific criminals who've done awful things. But I think if you're prime minister, you can't let the emotion get the best of you either.
Tony, any comment?
Yeah, the notwithstanding part clause is part of our Constitution. It was put in there expressly to get premiers on side so that we could repatriate our Constitution. So using the notwithstanding clause is a perfectly constitutional thing for governments to do and have done over the last 45 years. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I agree with Sergio. We have a saying in the law, hard cases make bad law. But at the same time, this is something that people can relate to. When you're talking about constitutional principles, it goes over the heads of most people, and rightly so. This is something, multiple murderers, mass murderers, and how we treat them in the justice system. There is a genuine feeling, and I can tell you I get this at the door. There is a fear about crime. And in your catchment area, Brian, the Mississaugas and the Oakvilles and the Auroras and so on, and I've door knocked in all of those places over the last 3 weeks. Crime, crime, crime. It may be the sleeper issue that few people have been talking about in the punditry class, but I'm telling you is out there. And so for Pierre to accentuate that and say, yeah, I believe that we should use the Constitution to get some of these people off the streets, that's a home run for him.
No, I got to tell you, as you probably know, Peel police budget is up 23% this year. 23%. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
And who did the Peel police endorse for this election?
I don't know.
Pierre
we're going to take a break, and we're going to be back with the Honorable Tony Clement and the Honorable Sergio Marchi in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. What a pleasure to have the Honorable Sergio Marchi and the Honorable Tony Clement chatting about what happened last night in the Leaders' Debate, their suggestions for tonight, and what's going on with the election. Tony, I see on social media, like you're out canvassing every day. Why are you doing this? Why are you so invested? I thought you were tired.
I'm a humble volunteer. What can I tell you? And I love canvassing. I probably knocked on 500,000 doors in my time in politics. And I think that's where you actually talk to real people about real issues and real problems and solutions. So, I just started I had a bunch of friends running, 2 or 3 friends very close by, one in Mississauga, Erin Mills, and another one in Oakville East and so on. So I said, hey, I'll come out. And then people on social media, other candidates saw that I was doing this and said, hey, come to my riding. And before I know it, I don't have a life other than knocking on doors and ridings I don't live in. But it's a lot of fun. I get to meet these candidates and see them up close and talk to their voters. I was in Northern Ontario earlier this week in Sudbury riding, and I was in Nipissing, Temiskaming a couple of weeks ago too. So it's not just in the GTA. And you really, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think I have a sense of where people are going, and it's not locked in for the Liberals yet, I'd have to say.
Sergio, what do you think? Is it locked in, or is it still?
No, I don't. I think if you've got 2 weeks to go, nothing is locked in. And what I've always told candidates is, regardless of whether you're winning or not, always run as if you're 10 points behind. Always overestimate your opponents, never underestimate them. The moment you do is the moment you shortchange yourself. So 2 weeks to go, lots of things can happen. Am I pleased with what Carney has done and where he is? Of course, he's ahead on each poll, but the only poll that counts is the one on the 28th. I think Tony's right. I mean, as a candidate, the candidate doesn't belong in the headquarters. He belongs on the streets and on the malls and at the bus stops and at the subways, canvassing. And that's the only way you can get across to your voters who you are, what your party is doing. And that's where you get the pulse as well. So I've done a bit of canvassing, not as much as Tony. I've also put together 15 friends, and we supported 6 candidates who are running in strategic ridings. A lot of them are first timers. So it's a way of encouraging also the first timers and giving them some of the resources to do what they can with it. And I found that, like this election, perhaps the closest one was 1988 when the free trade agreement with America was the issue. I have found everybody engaged. Everybody is invested. And the people I approached to fund these 6 candidates, those who said no didn't say no because they didn't want to. They said no because they were maxed out. They've already given to their local or to friends who are running. I like the fact that people are invested, and I'm anticipating a high voter turnout as a result.
What do you think, Tony? Is it going to be a big turnout?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with Sergio. People are paying attention and they know how important this election is and they want to make the right decision. To the extent that there are undecided, and there are, it's because they know how important this election is and they want to make a vote that will express their values and their interests, and it's not just a throwaway vote. So yes, I think that's good for democracy. We're coming into the advance polls this weekend.
Yeah.
Over the Easter holiday weekend. And so, yeah, I could foresee 30% of the population voting in the advance polls. I would not be surprised at that.
So April 28th is election day, and next week, every single night, other than Easter Monday, I've got a show on a different policy issue relevant to this election campaign. So I encourage any of you that are interested to tune in 6 o'clock every night on 960 AM, saga960am.ca if you want to stream me online. And/or you can get all my podcasts and videos on YouTube, on podcast servers, on my website as soon as the radio show goes to air. Sergio Marchi, Tony Clement, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. Good night.